All right. Today we are blessed to have with us class of 11, Karina Santellano, who is a PhD candidate at USC and a PhD candidate in sociology. So good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for allowing me to be on the show or series. I love it.
You're one of my greatest basketball players of all times. You made such great progress from where you started to then being a starter, and I think you were even second team all league by your senior year. So
somehow,
hey, progress, man. You know, progress, or maybe because I'm a great coach.
Oh my gosh, the games you played on us are still in my memory, or even you driving like the little, I think it was a golf cart as we were running. It was intense, Mr. Ramos. It was intense.
Hey, I'm just training PhD candidates. They just stopped telling me about basketball.
And now you're getting a PhD, so it all worked out.
Yeah,
it did.
Getting your PhD is way easier than being on my basketball team.
I would say equal, both difficult.
I'll take that. All right, so it's really good to have you, especially because you call yourself a race scholar. What does that term even mean? What is a race scholar?
Well, it's an identity that I'm coming into, and one that really that I connected with, especially in undergrad at Duke, because it's, for me, talking from my own personal experience, it was a very white, wealthy place that was so different from Preuss that it was quite shocking to me. And so race and ethnicity became something that I was really interested in, because I wanted to understand my own experience of being, a Latina, first-gen college student, immigrant parents. I wanted to understand my experience in that setting. And so I began taking sociology classes and learning more about race and ethnicity. I had a really great mentor, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who wrote Racism Without Racists, who talks about colorblind racism. So, how folks are like, oh, I'm not a racist, but like they still say racist stuff.
I don't even see color.
Exactly, perfect. So then I started to do some research on Black and Latinx friendships at Duke, because most of my friends were Black students who, and we, understood each other's experience, and we, talked and joked about white people and the ridiculous things that they would say. That brought us together, honestly. So it just was something that I was so fascinated about and wanted to learn more about. And I loved the research process. So then I decided to go to graduate school, where I've continued reading and learning about white supremacy and colonialism and, racial hierarchies, and being able to talk about that with scholars and trying my best to translate that to general audiences. So that's what it means.
And what was your major at Duke? What did you graduate with a degree in?
I got a bachelor's degree in sociology, and we had things called certificates, and I got one in Latino studies because it wasn't like a minor or a major at Duke.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting that it wasn't a minor or major. That's kind of telling of the system itself.
Exactly. So I had a lot of learning to do when I came back to California, actually, post-college.
And in college, didn't you study abroad?
I did study abroad. I went to Brazil for one summer. It's amazing.
Talk about racial hierarchies in Brazil, though, right? What was that like?
It was fascinating. Yeah, so Portuguese was my language in college. We had to learn a language, and I thought, okay, well, I know Spanish well enough to communicate with my parents and family and whatnot. So I wanted to try something different. And I think the World Cup was happening the summer right before I entered college. And I think I was watching the Brazilian soccer team play, and they were doing an interview, and I was like, I want to understand Portuguese. So, I went on my little enroll page and chose Portuguese. And I loved it. I loved my professors. It felt like a home, in a sense, like a good transition between Preuss and Duke, where it was still very familial, I still talk to the professor to this day. She was very motherly, so I appreciated that for me. Yeah, so then I went to Brazil. We were in Rio de Janeiro for part of the time, and then we were in Belém, which is like more of the Amazon North part, which is really interesting because the contexts are both different. In Rio, we stayed with white families by the beach, and it was interesting because one of my friends at that time was in a favela. He was doing a documentary in one of the biggest favelas in Rio. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. But so I would transition from the beach area, very white, expensive, and then I would go to the favela. I luckily fit in with my dark hair, like no one asked me anything. But in the favela, that's where a lot of the Black folks lived, folks who were service staff or cleaners in the city. And then I would return back home after visiting my friend there. And it was such a huge difference. Because in Brazil, they talk about racial democracy, like, oh, sure, there's different races, but there's no racism here. But there's clear inequalities.
Yeah. All right. And what is a favela?
Favela is basically where most like low income, poor folks live. So it's almost similar to the US where there's, areas that are impoverished, like structurally disadvantaged. And favelas are interesting because the homes are kind of built on top of each other. And there was one time where I was on top of someone's roof, and you could hear the buzz of a soccer game playing and people, laughing and cheering. And because of the way that the favela was structured, like you could hear everything. It was like a buzz. Fascinating.
Speaking of soccer, I am wearing my Ghana jersey today for Juneteenth, representing Ghana. Just thought I'd pass that along. So one reason why we wanted to have you is because you have been supporting protesters, but you've been doing it in a way that most people wouldn't even think of doing it. So how have you been supporting this Black Lives Matter movement and protesters?
Right, so I'm part of this group called Latina PhDs at USC because in my PhD program, I'm able to take classes with other students in different departments and schools. So I just became friends with a lot of these women and identified with them. And then one day, one friend, Cynthia, who's a mommy scholar, so she had her baby during grad school. Yeah, she's awesome. She's a boss. She thought, hey, why don't we institutionalize this and get some money from the university? Let's make this formal. Like this space needs to be at USC after we leave, and a space for Latina PhD students. So it was part of this group, and we had a meeting to just process the protests happening in LA that past weekend were very dangerous and kind of shocking. And so a lot of us we needed a space to process and figure out what we wanted to do. And so right before this meeting, I saw on Facebook, like, oh, there's a protest at USC around campus that maybe we should go. And someone else on the Zoom meeting said, what if we take waters? And then before we knew it, it was this whole like, okay, let's do a care kit with, all these things. And me being me, I was like, okay, let's use my backyard because I have space. And it's hard for me to not jump at opportunities. It's really hard for me, which Mr. Carr, I'm sure, but like, so we made 200 care kits, protester care kits, each with an orange, a snack bar, a water bottle, and a mask. And it was an awesome team effort. Some of the women came over and we created the protester care kits. My roommates helped out. And then the next day we got up early and we took 100 of the care kits to the USC protests or march. And then we took 100 to the downtown LA march that happened that Saturday night. So it was exhausting. I was dead tired, and I kept wondering, like, oh my gosh, we did all of this within 3 days. We fundraised and went out shopping and did everything. It was a lot.
What was the reception when you brought the protester kits? Were people like shocked? Were they happy? Were they surprised? What was their reaction?
They were overall happy. Some of them wanted to pay us. And we were like, no, it's free. Take it, please. So yeah, they were very pleasantly surprised. And it was also, it was nice to, be able to give something to someone that was, walking for a while, needed water or a snack. And we were also able to give some to homeless folks, unsheltered folks in downtown, who were kind of on the sidelines of the march, but still there. And I was like, well, honestly, they probably need a face mask and water and, this stuff more so than some of these protesters. So we did give some out to them. But yeah, overall, very good feedback. One part that I forgot. So some of the women in the group decided to include a Know Your Rights sheet for the protester care kit.
Very important.
One side in English and one side in Spanish. So
what were some of the items on the Know Your Rights?
Phone numbers to lawyers that were doing pro bono work. Some that made that known via Twitter. So it was a bunch of different information and whatnot. So it was good.
I have a question for you. So I'm thinking about the fact that it was you and a group of Latina scholars who got involved in a Black Lives Matter protest. And I'm thinking about past immigrant groups, like in American history. Immigrants have usually learned that they can rise up the hierarchy in the United States when they disassociate themselves from Black people. And so I'm just wondering, what that conversation was between you and other Latinas to decide, let's put ourselves in this movement, as opposed to standing out and then, getting the benefits of not being like Black people who are complaining. What was that conversation for you to really to invest yourself in the movement?
Right. That's a very, very important question. I think luckily our group was at the same understanding of we have to do something, we have to support our Black colleagues in some way. What's a way that we can do that without centering us, right? With not taking the attention away from police brutality or racism or anti-Blackness. So we tried really hard to find a way to be supportive, right? Instead of change the focus in any way. But I think we're all in a understanding that, solidarity is important and our freedoms and liberations are really tied up with each other. And from my own experience, I've been reflecting on this a lot. A lot of my educators in life have been Black. My first preschool teacher, Miss James at Freeze Elementary in Skyline, was Black. One of my math teachers in 4th grade who taught me fractions was Black, Mr. Reese. Mr. Carr, who took on different roles in high school, and then in college and even now in graduate school. I still seek Black mentors because I know they care about me. So I want to show up for them in some way. And a lot of my best friends, I want to be, as you said, a friend, an ally, an accomplice, however you want to think about it. Yeah.
That is, that's good to hear, because I think it is easier maybe in higher education to see that solidarity, because as you go up and there's less minorities, we tend to cling to each other when there's less of us. But when you're in elementary and there may have been a lot more students that look like you. And when you didn't have the same amount of education yet, it's easier to be discriminatory, and it's easier to be picky about who you look up to. So it's interesting, and it's kind of telling about who you are as a person, that throughout your life, you've had this allyship, this understanding, this sisterhood.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, please do.
So I have another question. I think when you first talked about what your focus in your PhD program, you said something about translating these ideas for the masses. And so I'm wondering, how are you translating this for your parents? Like, you know, are they in tune with Black Lives Matter? What kind of conversations are? It's the more educated you get, the easier it is to have those conversations because people have the vocabulary for it. What's your experience been talking to your San Diego family and your friends from San Diego?
That's also a good question. And it's hard. It's hard to translate. It's hard to talk to family members. And I think I've been trying to do that since really coming into a consciousness of, when my parents do say something anti-Black and being like, you're being racist. And of course I can do a better job of explaining why and how and whatnot. So I'm still in the process of it. But it's something that I do mention and speak up, and even to my siblings. I think because all three of my brothers stayed in California for their higher ed experiences, they didn't get race and racism in the same way that I did going to the South. And so one of my brothers, also Preuss alum George, is in Philadelphia right now, or he's been there for the past 2 years. And then as soon as he got there, he was like, I understand why you care about race and racism so much. Because he was, I'm not going to share the story because he didn't give me permission, but there's been instances where he experienced anti-Mexican racism in Philadelphia because their understandings of what Mexican or Mexican American or Latino, Latinx is very, narrow and specific compared to California, where you have different narratives and representations.
So Karina, have you learned any new skills since you've been in quarantine?
Yes, I cut my hair. I cut my own hair.
Okay.
I cut my own hair. That's a huge skill, I would say. I don't know if I would pay for another haircut again in my life, or maybe fewer times.
You're happy with the results?
I am happy with the results. I also, I was willing to take the risk because I was like, well, I probably won't, see or go anywhere for at least throughout the summer, so might as well.
Okay. Next question. Do you agree with Mr. Ramos that unfriending people on social media when they kind of conflict with your personal views is a great and healthy thing? Or do you agree with me that you want to keep them around so that way they can hear another point of view?
So when I watched the episode, I texted you immediately and I said, I agree with Mr. Ramos, unfriend, period. Because I think right now in my state, I may feel differently about this in the future, but it's just too much for me emotionally to spend time getting into a fight or even explaining things to folks via Facebook. Plus, right now, as a graduate student, I'm teaching undergrads as a TA, and so that's kind of how I understand my contribution of knowledge. And so I'm very, very specific about when I do it, and whether I'm being compensated and how, what's my emotional bandwidth. So those are things that determine if I want to engage or not.
So you do it to kind of protect your spirit.
Yes.
Are you doing anything to nurture your spirit in quarantine besides giving yourself top-notch haircut?
Yes. Luckily, I live in a neighborhood, like a nice, I live in Crenshaw right now. And it's interesting because most of the folks that live around me are like these older Black families who have lived here for decades, who lived here during the 92 riots. And so there's so much information that they have and experience. So I love my neighborhood, and I run around and walk, and I bought dumbbells finally. So I've been trying to keep healthy that way, because I mean, I'm sitting all day basically on this Zoom thing.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. And so when we gave you the questionnaire, you kind of refused to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. We all have many different identities, and none of us are just one identity. But if you had to pick one label, what's the one label that is going to go first when we talk about Karina?
Right. So I think why I was hesitant or resistant to answering that question was because, I mean, all my identities are very linked to each other, and they inform each other, right? Like my identity as a Latina is informed by my gender, because my brothers, you know, didn't and don't face the same things that I do as a woman. So it's very important to specify, like, for me, race, gender, and class, you know, inform me, or inform my identities. So for me, it's important to practice intersectionality, which is this kind of like acknowledgement that we're not just one identity, but we're informed by, you know, everything, legal status, you know, race, class, gender, sexuality, etc. So that's why I'm hesitant, but I do know that in some situations, of course, one identity may be more salient because of the situation, right?
I think you chose Latina. I mean, that's what you said. So even though you talked around it and you were hesitant, I think you chose Latina, but that's me.
That is a very important identity for me, for sure.
Okay. Last friendly fire, Oscar and I debated whether there should be equal pay in sports. Now, we're talking about professional sports. So, you know, as when you were a varsity basketball player, you deserved equality, but professional sports doesn't have a lot of equality between sports or between genders. What is your feeling about that?
So can you rephrase the question?
Do you think that men and women should get equal pay in professional sports?
Oh. I don't know if I know enough about that stuff, but I think they do. I think I've seen you talk about how women should be paid more on Facebook. I don't know if that's what you said in the other friendly fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my argument was that it shouldn't be equal because sports is entertainment. And so in some cases, women should be paid more because they're more interesting. For example, Serena Williams is basically the greatest athlete of the last 30 years in any sport. And she's way more interesting than male tennis players, so she deserves more. But the WNBA is not as good of a product as the NBA. So the NBA should not be supplementing the pay or splitting it equally with the WNBA. That was kind of the argument on my side. Oscar argued that there should be equality. So anyway, we'll probably edit this part out because you didn't have a strong answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, one last thing. You're in LA now.
Mm-hmm.
You were in North Carolina for a bit. You're from San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Who has the best Mexican food?
San Diego for sure.
Is it even close?
I would say San Diego, then LA, then North Carolina. As far as taco shop, San Diego is number one. I had some carne asada fries a few weeks ago here in LA, and they were not good. I couldn't finish them. I had to throw them away, and I did not feel bad. You know how you feel bad when you throw away food or don't finish it? I did not feel bad. I was like, that was not good.
Like nobody deserves this. Just belongs right here in the trash.
Exactly. So I'm hoping to go to San Diego in the next week, and I will get some carne asada fries for my spirit.
What is your favorite taco shop in San Diego?
I go to one close to my house, so it's in Lemon Grove. It's called, I think, Santana's. Let me see. But it's close to the Big Lemon.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Karina. It is great to actually be taught by our former students.
It is amazing to see you. Yeah, go ahead. Just want to say. No, I'm just so impressed. I haven't had much contact with you since you graduated from Troy, so it's I'm just amazed at how much you've grown and proud that you're out there continuing that work. It's just I'm just in awe of you.
Oh, thank you.
And the reality is, at this point, you are more of an expert than we are.
Yes.
And so we need you to come back and teach us. Finish that PhD, and then you need to teach us, because we're not experts the way you are. We need to take your class. So let us know, keep us updated so we can learn from you.
Tell UCSC to hire me, or San Diego State.
I attended both, and I also attended USD, so one of them, we'll get you back.
Yeah.
Taco shop. All right, thanks a lot, Karina. I appreciate it.